Lucas's mother called me a burden in front of 20 people. Not privately. Not later. Right there at our engagement dinner. She lifted her champagne glass, smiled sweetly at the table, and said, "Lucas has always been generous. I just hope Mara understands that marriage means not becoming a financial burden." 20 people turned to look at me. His uncles, the family lawyer, her closest friends, even Lucas's father. No one said a word. Because in that room, Margaret Whitmore was the authority on everything that mattered. Money, reputation, family loyalty. And most of them had spent years learning that disagreeing with her was uncomfortable. What none of them knew was that 2 weeks earlier, Margaret had quietly prepared legal documents that would give her control over nearly every financial decision Lucas and I would make after we were married. His trust fund, our bank accounts, his company, any business I ever built, our investments, even major financial decisions inside our marriage. She called it family protection. I called it financial surveillance. And the only reason that dinner ended the way it did was because Lucas had recorded a phone call with his mother, explaining the entire plan. But to understand how that moment destroyed the illusion she had spent decades building, you need to understand how carefully she constructed the trap. 3 months before the engagement dinner, my life had finally become quiet. For most people, quiet is boring. For me, quiet felt like survival. After the disaster with my sister and the clinic loan, I had finally stepped away from the constant chaos that defined my family. No more midnight emergencies. No more guilt disguised as responsibility. No more phone calls that began with "I need a favor" and ended with me paying for someone else's bad decisions. That was the season Lucas and I became serious. We had met 2 years earlier at a financial technology conference. I was speaking on a panel about fraud indicators in commercial lending. My job involves reviewing financial statements, identifying risk, and figuring out when people are presenting numbers that don't match the story they're telling. Lucas was there because his cybersecurity firm specialized in internal breach investigations for financial institutions. Our industries intersected. Fraud and security always do. Most men in professional conferences either try to impress you or ignore you. Lucas did neither. He asked intelligent questions. Then he listened carefully to the answers. Later we had coffee. Then dinner. Then a second dinner 6 weeks later when he was back in Seattle. Lucas had a quality that is surprisingly rare. He was calm, steady, the kind of person who didn't create drama simply to feel important. After growing up in a family where emotional explosions were a weekly event, calm felt like oxygen. Lucas built his cybersecurity consulting firm from scratch. Over 6 years, it grew into a respected company handling breach response and internal security audits for banks and financial firms. He worked hard. He earned his success. But Lucas also came from money. Generational money. His grandfather built a shipping logistics company in the 1970s. His father expanded it. When the company sold years later, the proceeds were placed into trusts and investment vehicles designed to last for decades. Lucas was a beneficiary of one of those trusts. But unlike some people born into that kind of wealth, Lucas didn't rely on it. He built his own career. He built his own company. And he liked the independence that came with that. His mother did not. Margaret Whitmore believed family wealth should remain centralized, structured, disciplined, and most importantly, controlled, preferably by her. At first I thought she simply disliked me. That would have been normal. Some mothers struggle to accept their sons choosing partners. But Margaret's behavior wasn't emotional. It was strategic. She didn't dislike me because of who I was. She disliked the possibility that Lucas might build a life she couldn't supervise. 2 weeks before the engagement dinner, Lucas arrived at my apartment carrying a thick leather portfolio. "My mom asked me to sign these," he said. "What are they?" "Pre-wedding financial documents," that's what she called them. That phrase alone made me cautious. In commercial lending, when someone describes complicated legal structures as routine paperwork, it usually means the real purpose is buried in the middle. I opened the folder and began reading. The first document looked normal. Trust Distribution Continuity Agreement. Trusts often have administrative structures. Nothing unusual there. But around page 6, the language changed. Authority over Lucas's trust distributions would shift to a stability subcommittee after marriage. The chair of that subcommittee was Margaret. I frowned. Lucas watched my expression. "That Ben?" "Not yet," I said. Then I kept reading. The second document was where things became disturbing. Marital Capital Governance Framework. The title alone sounded like something written by someone who thought marriage should be run like a corporation. Under the framework, any major financial decision Lucas and I made after marriage could be routed through the Whitmore family office if trust money supported our household in any way. Real estate purchases, investment decisions, business expansions, capital contributions. And then I found the clause that made everything clear. If a business owned or operated by Lucas or his spouse was connected to household liquidity supported by trust distributions, it could be classified as a family-exposed operating asset, meaning the family office could claim oversight. I read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Lucas leaned forward. What does that mean? It means your mother built a system where she can interfere with our entire marriage. Lucas sat down beside me and began reading the sections I highlighted. His expression changed slowly. Confusion. Disbelief. Then anger. She can't seriously expect me to sign this. Oh, she expects it, I said. How? She's going to make refusing look irresponsible. Lucas frowned. What do you mean? I closed the folder. Pressure works better when there's an audience. That was when the engagement dinner invitation arrived. If this story feels familiar, like the video quietly, the invitation looked elegant. Private room. Waterfront restaurant. 20 guests. Hosted by Margaret Whitmore. The guest list told its own story. Lucas's father. His sister. 2 uncles. An aunt. The family attorney. 2 longtime business associates. Margaret's closest friend. And only 3 people from my side. My friend Tessa. Theo, a contractor friend who had helped me through the clinic mess. And Naomi, a colleague from my bank. Margaret wasn't planning a dinner. She was assembling witnesses. If she could make me look financially threatening in front of the right audience, then her legal structures would suddenly seem reasonable. Protective. Responsible. That was the strategy. Lucas looked at the guest list. She's staging something. Yes, I said. What do we do? I glanced at the phone on the kitchen table. You call her, he frowned. And say what? Ask questions. Lucas understood immediately. Because Margaret was careful. But careful people sometimes reveal the truth when they believe they're explaining something to someone they still control. Lucas placed his phone on the table, pressed record, and dialed. Margaret answered quickly. Darling. Hi, Mum. Quick question about the documents. Of course. Lucas kept his voice neutral. The trust agreement says the Stability Subcommittee gets authority after marriage. It's simply continuity planning. For what? For family discipline. Lucas glanced at me. And the governance framework? That protects the family. From what? A pause. Then Margaret answered carefully. Marriage introduces financial variables. You mean Mara? I mean outsiders to the structure. Outsiders. Not daughter-in-law. Not family. Outsiders. Lucas remained calm. And if I don't sign? Margaret paused again. Then the truth slipped through. Then distributions would need to be revisited. Meaning frozen. Meaning controlled. Lucas asked one more question. And our businesses? If household liquidity is supported by family capital, then operating assets should remain reviewable. That sentence told us everything. Margaret didn't just want control of the trust. She wanted leverage over our entire future. Lucas ended the call a few minutes later. He looked at the recording. She really thinks she gets to approve our life. I nodded. She thinks she gets to design it. The night of the engagement dinner arrived 2 weeks later, and Margaret Whitmore believed she had arranged every piece of the board perfectly. What she didn't know was that the most dangerous weapon in the room wasn't money, or influence, or reputation. It was a 3-minute recording on my phone, and she had just handed it to us herself. The restaurant Margaret chose was exactly the kind of place she loved. Elegant, controlled, expensive without being loud about it. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over dark water reflecting the city lights. The dining room smelled faintly of polished wood and citrus oil. Soft piano music floated through the air, just loud enough to remind everyone they were somewhere important. Margaret greeted guests at the door like a hostess, welcoming people into a performance she had carefully rehearsed. When Lucas and I arrived, she stepped forward immediately. Mara, she said warmly, you look lovely. Her smile was perfect. Practiced. The kind of smile that photographs beautifully but never quite reaches the eyes. Thank you, I said. We're so happy you're finally joining the family, she added. The way she said finally made the sentence feel less like a welcome and more like a condition. Lucas and I were seated in the center of the long table. Margaret sat directly across from us. The family attorney sat 2 seats away from her. Her closest friend Evelyn sat on her right. Lucas's uncles and aunt filled the rest of the table. My side of the table was smaller. Tessa, Teo, Naomi. They didn't belong to Margaret's world, which meant they weren't afraid of it. Dinner began pleasantly. Margaret was good at that. She understood the importance of letting people relax before tightening the room. Wine was poured. Stories were told. Lucas's uncle joked about old business deals. Margaret laughed softly in exactly the right places. For the first 30 minutes, everything felt perfectly normal. Then she began shaping the narrative. Mara has such an impressive career, she said. Commercial lending must be very demanding. It can be. She nodded thoughtfully. I've always admired women who succeed in high-pressure environments. Pause. Though careers like that do make family life complicated. Lucas's hand brushed mine under the table. He heard it. Margaret continued. Lucas has always been generous. One of his uncles chuckled. Too generous. Margaret smiled. Yes, he always wants to help people. Her eyes flicked toward me. Only for a moment. But long enough for the implication to land. Lucas the provider. Mara, the possible recipient. The story was being built piece by piece. Another guest asked Lucas about his cybersecurity firm. Before Lucas could answer, Margaret spoke again. We all hope Lucas continues building his business carefully. Lucas looked up. I've been doing quite well so far. Margaret smiled gently. No one is questioning that, darling. That was exactly what she was doing. The dinner continued. Conversation flowed. But the energy in the room had shifted. Margaret had planted the idea she wanted everyone to hold in their minds. By the time dessert arrived, the room was quiet and attentive. The stage was ready. Margaret stood and lifted her champagne glass. I'd like to say a few words. Everyone turned toward her. Margaret was used to rooms doing that. Lucas has always had an extraordinarily generous heart. She began telling stories, carefully selected ones. Stories about Lucas helping friends, helping relatives, helping employees. Every story ended with the same idea. Lucas was generous. Lucas provided. Lucas gave. Then she turned toward me. And Mara is clearly accomplished. Pause. Intelligent. Pause. Disciplined. Compliments. Structured. Strategic. But marriage, she continued, is a different discipline. The room grew quiet. Marriage requires balance. Transparency. Shared responsibility. Then she looked directly at me. And of course, when a man has spent his life being taught to provide. Another pause. The last thing he needs is to marry someone who becomes a burden. The word landed hard. Burden. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. One of Lucas's cousins looked down at his plate. Naomi leaned back in her chair slowly. Theo's expression went flat. Margaret took a sip of champagne, satisfied. This was the moment she had planned. The public framing. If I reacted emotionally, she would look calm. If I defended myself, she would look concerned. If Lucas defended me, she could accuse him of being manipulated. But I didn't react. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the room. Clear. Undeniable. If Mara marries you, she will expect participation in financial decisions simply by proximity. Several heads turned toward Margaret. Her smile froze. The recording continued. That is exactly why the governance framework matters. Lucas's voice followed. And if I don't sign? Margaret answered calmly. Then distributions would need to be revisited. Someone inhaled sharply. The table had begun to understand. The audio continued. And our businesses? Lucas asked in the recording. Margaret's voice again. If family-supported household liquidity is involved, every operating asset should be reviewable. The recording played the final line. If she enters this family, the least she can do is respect structures she did not help build. I stopped the audio. No one spoke. The silence was heavy. Margaret's face had lost its color. Turn that off, she said quietly. Too late. Lucas stood slowly. Mum, he said calmly, would you like to explain why you prepared legal documents that would give you control over my trust, my company, and my marriage? Margaret recovered quickly. It was taken out of context. Naomi spoke immediately. No, she said. It sounded extremely clear. Margaret ignored her. You are humiliating me. Lucas shook his head. No, you tried to structure our lives behind our backs. Margaret's composure cracked slightly. You're being manipulated. That was meant for the room, for the audience she had tried to recruit. I finally spoke. No, Margaret. He's being informed. Her eyes snapped toward me. You have no idea what this family requires. I'm at Hargay's. No, but I understand exactly what those documents require. Lucas picked up his coat. The wedding is still happening, he said. Margaret blinked. For a second, relief appeared in her eyes. Then he finished the sentence. But you are finished planning any part of it. The relief vanished. Lucas continued. And effective tonight, you are removed from every discussion involving my trust, my company, or our finances. The room was completely silent. Lucas's father finally spoke. Margaret. But he didn't finish the sentence. Margaret looked around the table. For allies. For support. For someone to restore the balance she had controlled for so many years. No one moved. Not even the family attorney. Lucas looked at her one last time. You tried to control our lives. That ends now. Then he took my hand, and we walked out of the restaurant. The night air outside was cold and clean. For a moment we stood in silence. Lucas looked out over the water. She's been doing this my whole life, he said quietly. Every decision, every relationship, every business move. I waited. He exhaled slowly. I just never saw the pattern clearly before. I squeezed his hand. You see it now. Lucas nodded. Yes. And that was the moment everything changed. The next 6 weeks were about separation. Not emotional separation. Structural separation. Lucas hired independent trust counsel. Not the family attorney. A specialist. They reviewed every document connected to his trust. Every committee appointment. Every advisory authority Margaret had quietly accumulated over the years. Then Lucas removed her. One position at a time. Committee chair. Oversight authority. Reporting access. By the end of the process, Margaret no longer had any formal control over his trust distributions. Then Lucas addressed the second problem. His company. Because once his lawyer began reviewing correspondence, they discovered something even more disturbing. Margaret had already drafted proposals suggesting Lucas's cybersecurity firm be integrated into a family investment structure if he ever sought growth capital. In other words, if he wanted to expand his company, she wanted influence, control, visibility. And because the marital governance documents would have connected my future finances to that same structure, she would have gained leverage over my career as well. Lucas removed those pathways too. Separate financial advisors. Separate custodians. Separate reporting. Every door she could have used was closed. Margaret sent emails, then letters. First polite, then emotional, then angry. None of them were answered. Because once someone reveals that their love depends on leverage, silence becomes self-respect. 3 months later, Lucas and I got married. Small ceremony, 40 guests. No private dining rooms. No financial governance frameworks. No, Margaret. Peace, I discovered, is surprisingly quiet, not because it costs money, but because it requires walking away from people who believe control is the same thing as love. That night, Lucas and I sat by the window in our hotel room overlooking the water. No lawyers. No documents. No strategic frameworks. Just silence. Real silence. The expensive kind. The kind that only arrives when you stop negotiating your future with people who believe they own it. Comment one word. Receipts. If someone ever smiles too carefully while telling you a structure exists for your protection, read the fine print. If a family says trust but means obedience, believe the paperwork. And if someone ever tries to design your life before you've even lived it, remember something simple. Systems only work when people keep signing them. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do in a room full of powerful people is press play. Subscribe for more stories where receipts win.